what the hell is God? What do we mean by God? Because everybody has a different idea of that as well.
Do you think everybody has a different idea? I don't.
Well, I think a lot of people have a different idea. I mean, when I hear a Christian fundamentalist, the God that or when I hear an atheist, the God that he doesn't believe in, I don't believe in either. But
can I propose a foundation for that? We can just go to nomadological religion. God is essentially the name for the ultimate Urfather. So it's ahead of you. The fathers have walked ahead of you. They're ahead of you. You're set to follow them. You're on the move all the time. It's also exodology in Judaism. You leave the old, walking in the new. And God is just the name of where you're going. The promised land is.
I also disagree.
So, hello. My name is Andrew Sweeny. I'm the host at MMA, the Maniphesto Media Academy. And I'm here with some of the most dangerous individuals I know. And I'm saying dangerous in the Jordan Peterson sense. They're monsters, monster intellects. And what is very interesting is how different perspectives here are. We have Jonathan Pageau, who is an icon carver, a pretty famous YouTuber and a symbolic thinker. He's also a comic book writer. Mm-hmm. Soon to release his, what's it called, Jonathan?
God's Dog.
God's Dog.
Yeah.
Right, comic book, which I'm sure will be absolutely incredible because of his sense of aesthetics and all of his work in general and how fine it is. And then we have Alexander BARD, who loves to be known as the Camille Paglia of Sweden. He's a hardcore philosopher.
I would love to be called Camille Paglia with a penis.
Oh, excuse me. I got that just a little bit wrong. Okay. He's a hardcore philosopher. He's a Zoarastrian. He's an author of many books. He's an activist. He's a community creator. And then I'm here with Thomas, who is our resident expert on René Girard. He's obsessed with the René Girard's view on Christianity. I also have something in common with him in that we've both studied a lot of Buddhist Tantra and Dzogchen. So welcome, everybody. And I'm going to start off with a two-part question. The first question is, I think with this word religion, it's sometimes equivocal. We don't know what we mean when we talk about it. So, and I imagine that maybe all four of us have a different view of what religion means. And so that's the first question. What the hell is religion anyway? And the second question is about this word, the apocalypse. The etymology of apocalypse is something about revealing, uncovering. So, so this is the question I'm asking is, are we living in this apocalyptic age in this sense of revealing and uncovering, or mass collapse or mass crisis, or both? So there's my two-part question. I'm going to pass it over to Jonathan first.
Sorry, on the first one. All right. So the best way, I think, to understand religion is even the word, like it's what binds us together. And so the reason why religion often looks the way it does is that we're always bound together towards something which is above the elements being bound. That is, if it's whatever group of people together, they need something above it, some ideal, some purpose to bind them together so that they know that they're a group and not just a scattering of people on a crowd, basically. And so that's the basic idea of religio, but the idea is that it scales up, let's say, because the more you want to be bound, the higher the reason why you're bound together should be. So that's also why religion often goes, not all religions, but many religions will be, let's say, will surround a god or a cult of some kind where there's a ritual participation in the thing that binds us together, sacrifices, singing, dancing, all these things which we do in order to celebrate and acknowledge that thing which binds us together, and then manifested in the fact that we exist as some kind of body, some kind of community. So I think that's the best way to understand religion. And what's helpful with that is that it also scales down to things that we usually don't consider religion, but it can help us understand, families and teams and all these things, or companies, all these things which bind people together, how they also have something of a religio to them. They need to have rituals. They need to have common identities, common goals, common purposes, and ways to celebrate and to manifest that. So now in terms of apocalypse, I think that the reason why people can understand why there's a relationship between apocalypse and the end of the world, let's say, is that the notion of the final revelation, it basically is a manifestation of how reality is in its end. So the idea of think about all of reality coming to an end, and then you get a sense of what everything is. And that's what, let's say, revelation is, or apocalypse is in the biblical way. But the way that we colloquially tend to think of apocalypse is more having to do with the end of something, right? A cataclysm or something which brings about the end of a world. And I do definitely think that we are at the end of something, right? That there's all these pieces are moving very fast to manifest the end of a massive cycle. Now, whether the cycle, how big that end is and how big the cycle is, I think is maybe up for discussion. But I think it's very difficult not to see that the changes are happening so fast that many elements of the way that we understand, that say our ancestors not very long ago understood and participated in reality is on the verge of very deep transformations.
Okay, I'll pass it to you, Alexander.
Okay, so I love the word religion and I hate the word spirituality, which is the opposite of what you hear most of the time these days. People say that, oh, I'm not religious, but I'm very spiritual. When everybody says something like that, they're probably just like a banal New Age commercial person or something like that. They buy crystals and shit. So they're not seriously interested in what we're talking about. You could also reframe it and say that spirituality is for women and religion is for men, which I think is an even better, more honest way of describing it. And I agree with Jonathan. Religio, religare, in French Latin means what connects us together. Barasam in Persian, for example. So this is essentially what binds us together, also possibly in larger populations than mere tribal. Originally, religion or spirituality was just something tribal. But as soon as we had larger populations that needed to be bound together, we needed narratives that tie them together, like you had your God in your river valley, we had our God in our river valley. And finally, one day we raised a temple between the two rivers and declared the two gods had a shared ancestor. And because they had a shared ancestor, we no longer need to kill each other all the time. So religion is essentially how we contain war and try to maintain long periods of peace and prosperity. And without religion, we're not going to do that. That's why I'm a big proponent of religion in general. I just think that if you say you're not religious or you don't have religions, then you have terrible, bad religions instead of having really good thought through religions. So that's why I'm a great defender of the concept of religion to begin with. I think it's hard to be masculine and be a man or anything like that unless you're some way also religious. So just convert to some religion, pick one. That's my recommendation. Go deeply into different religious histories and different cultures. Maybe find your own heritage or background and then find your religion. I think this is good advice. When it comes to the apocalypse, religion is essentially two different kinds. The original religion was process and nothing but process. We call this the eternal return of the same. Like it's a new year, but it's exactly like last year. It's a new spring, but it's exactly like last spring. It's a new summer, exactly like last summer. Everything repeats itself. Everything comes back to the same point. And as long as we were nomadic, this religion called nomadology in our work is fundamentally a process religion. Most of Hinduism, for example, or paganism are process religions in the sense that they just return to the same point and nothing interrupts that. Now, I'm a Zoroastrian, and what the Zoroastrians invented, that the Jews and the Muslims and the Christians also sympathized with, was the idea that there could be an event. And with an event, history can change forever, and history can take a whole new direction. And that's called eventology. So religion can be nomadology or eventology. I would say preferably it's both, because the world both consists of things that are always the same and come back to the same point. We die. A new generation grows up. We give birth to children. The children become exactly like us, although they think they're different, right? And then one day we become older and we become elders or whatever, and then we're grandfathers, and then we die, and then new children are born. So whenever somebody dies, somebody else is born. That's process religion fundamentally, and that's part of reality. That's most reality. But there's also the possibility that an event can happen. If an event happens, history changes forever. I think Cadell Last is really good at this. He also framed the term negatology here, which I think is a playful way of doing eventology. Like, for an event to ever happen, something must first die. It's very Hegelian, right? Something must first die. So whenever we start accepting event, at least as Zoroastrian, we have to accept that we die. We're gone forever. Something dies to leave that space for something else. Now, some religions practice an afterlife after you die. Some religions practice reincarnation after you die. I would say the only radical way to do an event is actually to practice you die when you die and everything's over and something else will finally replace you. But we can discuss that later if that's important today or not. It depends on what we can believe, or must believe, what we can believe when it comes to religion today. The negatology is a good word there. But essentially, religion is process and event. And I'm a strong advocate of both. I think that if you only go for the event, then you miss out on the process. If you only go for the process, you miss out on the event. And I'm sure Thomas Hamelryck is going to go into this a lot. In Eastern thinking, it's called, you must not have Tantra without the Sutra, and you must have a Sutra without the Tantra. A complete world picture consists of both Sutra and Tantra in Eastern religion. And that's exactly what process and event really are. So that's where I'm leaving it for now.
Okay, so maybe
yeah, just one more. Apocalypse, yeah. So apocalypse here is the ultimate event in the sense that it's the ultimate death. I would say that being less dramatic, I would say it's a paradigm shift. So whenever history leaves all these old values behind and needs to redefine itself and have new values for a new era, it goes through a paradigm shift. An apocalypse is essentially a beautiful word for paradigm shift. It means that something old has to die. It's over and done with. Something new has to be born. And that's what apocalypse means to me in this kind of work.
Great. Yeah, that's a beautiful, interpretation against our common understanding of the word. So Thomas, maybe you want to bring in some Girardian thought here, because Girard's view of religion is something like religion began with the sacrifice of the scapegoat. And then Christianity reversed this trend, which was universal in all early religions. This is René Girard's theory of the sacrificial, arbitrary victim who represented, the sins of the community. So do you want to go into that a bit, Thomas?
Well, why not? That's what I do. Yes. So what is religion? So religion is something that emerged at the same time when the transition from animal to human happened. You can actually not have according to the Girardian system, you need to have religion to make the transition from the animal to the human possible. Because the difference between animals and humans is that humans have desire. And desire is mimetic. That means that you copy what other people want. So you're basically humans. They're basically present in a network of desire, and they constantly copy what other people want. And that means that you go into jealousy and envy and competition, and that leads to war of all against all, and that leads to violence that can eradicate an entire tribe. So you need to have religion to somehow streamline this desire that so easily gets out of hand. And the earliest religion, the archaic religion, where everybody goes back to, if you don't have an alternative, that's scapegoating. So when everybody's fighting, you don't solve the problems by sitting down around the fire and then talking it out, but you solve it by projecting all the blame on one person. The scapegoat, typically a weak person, typically an outcast, a leper or somebody who's crippled, a weak person, a woman, a child, and you focus the aggression of the entire tribe on that scapegoat, and that way you get rid of your aggression. And you need to do this, and this is basically the nomadology, right? So you need to do this regularly, maybe a couple of times a year or once a month. You kill something so that you can channel the aggression in the tribe. And so basically a lot of religions, Zoroastrianism, Judaism, Buddhism, but also Islam, they basically turned away from this brutal way of doing religion, and they try to basically come up with systems that basically control desire in such a way that the scapegoat mechanism wasn't necessary anymore, or at least not so intensely needed anymore. And that brings us to the apocalyptic times, because it's very dangerous to take away the archaic mechanisms. It actually works. The Roman Empire, the Greek civilization was entirely based on scapegoating. So it's a stabilizing mechanism. It's cruel and it's awful and it's terrible and it kills a lot of people, but it works. But if you tell people that they cannot kill anymore, then they don't have this easy way to get rid of their aggressions. So the conflict can spread, and there's no simple solution against it except turning to a religion that really manages to deal with desire. And then you basically need to have a religion that has some sutric aspects and some tantric aspects. If you don't have that, then people revert to the archaic religion, but it's not even paganism anymore, because paganism is organized. So you get these blind mobs that basically go crazy and indulge in violence. And that's basically the apocalyptic times. That's why we live in apocalyptic times, because of course, archaic religion has disappeared. We don't really find it acceptable to sacrifice people on a monthly basis. But at the same time, the traditional religions, they are also disappearing. They're collapsing. So these traditional religions like Christianity, like Hinduism and Buddhism and so on, so these are less and less powerful. So that means that we run the risk of a violence that gets out of hand in a digital world spread spread through all the digital media that have basically connected us all and undifferentiated us. So that would be my short take on it.
Good. So maybe Jonathan and Alexander, do you guys want to respond to what you've heard so far? Jonathan, do you have points of like resonance and agreement?
No, I think basic things that I've heard are good. Like it's that I really agree with everything. I think it's interesting to notice right now, like in terms of COVID, we're seeing the resurgence of scapegoat thinking, and it's very fascinating because there's something fascinating in a very dark way, but I'm definitely seeing it. It's really interesting, like just in terms of watching people who are vaccinated be afraid of non-vaccinated people, like physically afraid, and then want to be isolated from them and, want them to kind of be removed from their midst. So we're kind of seeing that happen. It seems like it was inevitable that at some point it would come to that. And so scapegoating is somewhat inevitable as soon, especially as traditional religions kind of break down. It's just going to happen in an unconscious way. Just a necessary part of how to know you're a good citizen is how do you even that is a problem. Like, how do we know that we're inside? We need an outside. And so if especially if we have in a world where we want to kind of fetishize the migrant and fetishize the foreigner and the stranger, then we still need a scapegoat. And so we need to find that.
Yeah,
I agree completely. Yeah, I agree.
I just want to say first that is the scapegoat now the ordinary person?
No, wait. I can answer that. I think what we actually agree on here is that if you become like a secular atheist, you're proud of yourself that God is dead, you're alive, you're fine. You fall into an all against all world. That's undeniably what happens. You become an individual who fights against 8 billion other individuals in this world. And we're seeing it online today when everybody's screaming at the top of their lungs and there's hardly any audience left because everybody has a stage now, but they're on the same stage and nobody pays attention to anybody. And that can only lead to mass confusion, which leads to conspiracy theories. And conspiracy theories is always scapegoating. I gave a speech at the Jewish congregation in Stockholm. I'm a non-Jew, but I'm very pro the Jews, and I'm a Zoarastrian. But I gave a speech at the Jewish congregation in Stockholm last week, and I said, they asked me, so what's going to happen next? And I said, well, you have climate change, and it doesn't matter if you believe in climate change or not, because either climate change itself is going to be blamed on the Jews very soon, or the invention of climate change, like the illusion that there's a climate change going on, is going to be blamed on the Jews. And all it takes is for some German to swift sides from the Jews to the Arabs and go with the Palestinians, and it's probably going to happen in the next 5 years, and that German would then become the first green Nazi. I mean, that's how close we are to scapegoating in culture at all times. And the funny thing, we're not even imaginative about this. We're probably going to go back to blame the Jew all over again. So
Jonathan talks about we're living in an inverse world, kind of a clown world, he calls it. I think that's kind of what you're talking about.
Yeah, but Jonathan, let's not move too quickly. Let's stay with this topic for a while. So what I'm saying here is that what these organized religions try to do, and this includes Zoroastrianism, Judaism, and Christianity. We can leave Islam there because we need a Muslim to speak for Islam. But I would say what these religions try to do is that they try to contain the scapegoating mechanism that came out of Prost itself instantly. So once we're permanently settled, we cannot go on scapegoating all the time and blame everything on the scapegoat. Number one, because we never solve any genuine problems that way. Politics cannot be solved through scapegoating. And number two, innocent people die all the time. And it creates, of course, a society that's not civilized. So the idea of civilization started in Persia, was inherited by Christians and Jews. And what that idea is that if we have the event added to the process, and the event could be terrible, it could be the death of all of civilization, if we don't look out for that, the anti-event. But the event could also be that somebody dies on a cross and shows us the world could be different. Or somebody walks out there and becomes a prophet and declares you can walk, like Zoroastrian did, you can walk into your enemy's territory and tell the enemy, I'm not going to boil your children in oil. That's Cyrus the Great, 539 before Christ. I'm not going to boil your children in oil. I'm actually going to keep you to run your own nation within my empire, which is the beginning of Judaism, by the way, as well. And what these religions try to do is to try to contain the scapegoat mechanism. Girard goes into that specifically concerning Christianity. When you look at all the larger organized religions, they try to contain the scapegoat mechanism. And the way to do it is by imagining a larger population where everybody's interdependent on everybody else. And therefore, maybe because somebody did something and became a role model that was totally different from anything we've seen before in history. A prophet walked in and the prophet committed something or did something that completely changed the way we look at ourselves. That event can change history forever. This is where these religions agree. They just then disagree on the events themselves.
Yeah. Well, maybe I can say something. I think that it's important to understand that also Christianity, it's not so much that it tries to contain the scapegoat event, is that it tries to transform it into something else, because we actually engage in the scapegoat event every year. When you wear a cross, you're engaging in the scapegoating event, but it's just that we're doing it in a different position where the self-sacrifice becomes let's say the final resolution of the scapegoating event, and it actually reveals something about reality, which is true, which is you realize that in a certain manner, the way in which we exist as a group is always through self-sacrifice. That we need to sacrifice our idiosyncrasies, our passions, an aspect of our desires in order to be able to exist together. And so I think that one of the things that the cross does is that it doesn't negate or try to contain it in the sense of, right, like keeping it out so that it gets hotter and it boils and then at some point it just breaks in, but rather it transformed in a way that you realize that the real scapegoat, it should be me. Like I should be the scapegoat. And if we all do that, then what happens is we sacrifice an aspect of ourselves and we're able to kind of cohere in love, which is the Christian ideal.
Jonathan, when we had our conversation before, we were talking a little bit, because I come from a Vajrayana perspective. And in Vajrayana, we have a sutric aspect and a tantric aspect. And the sutric aspect is about rules and regulations of behavior. And it's really about sacrificing and developing wisdom and intelligence and becoming civilized as a human being and all that. And then when we move into the tantric aspect, then the desire, the passions become something else. There's a transformation that takes place. And you made the incredible, insight to me that's what mass is actually. So there's actually a tantric aspect within Christianity in the sense that, you're drinking the blood of Christ and eating the body of Christ, and this is the ultimate taboo. It's cannibalism, right? So anyway.
Well, I know, I agree. I think that that's true. There's a way in which, like, even in the ancient world, you would have something like the lesser mysteries and the higher mysteries. And then the lesser mysteries would be something like you said, like just the way the world works and just like all the rules and things you're supposed to do. And then the higher mysteries would appear almost as a transgression of the lower mysteries. Mm-hmm. And I think that that's the type of relationship you saw with things like Tantra, which is that the notion that the higher mysteries are almost like a kind of, an abolition of the structure, right? It's almost like it's an elation. You move into the something which is above the pattern. And so it can take all these kinds of forms. But it's problematic. Let's say it's a little problematic because in a way, it should be kept secret. Like if it's secret, maybe it's not as bad. But as soon as it starts to leak out, then it becomes destructive to the structure of the society.
Totally. So, tantric has to be secret. It absolutely has to be, and it has to be through initiation, and it has to, Christianity
creates a kind of easier ladder, which is that it unites all the levels together. So it does have an initiatory aspect. If you look at early Christianity, it's clearly initiatory. They would even exclude the catechumen during part of the liturgy. As you came towards the sacrament, the non-initiated would be removed from the space, and they would close the doors, and then they would participate in the final, let's say, higher mystery together. But then there's a manner in which the line between the two became less oppositional, you could say, and more united. But it's all there. Like if you look not only at the imagery of let's say the communion itself, but there's a lot of other stuff going on. Like, for example, the relationship between the Mother of God as both the Mother of Christ and the Bride of Christ. And so the notion of transgression in terms of incest, all of these taboos are there in the holy mysteries, but they're there in a way that doesn't destroy the world, because if you engage in incest, if you want to do that, for spiritual reasons, it's a very dangerous practice because you could really destroy your society if you do those kinds of things. And so this way, let's say the non-logical or the irrational aspect and the kind of elated aspect gets integrated more fully into the full system.
Mm-hmm. Can I just add here then that the Tantra or Sutra divide is actually older than the event itself. So Tantra Sutra comes from nomadology itself. That's why I have Tantra Sutra in India. Essentially, it is that we all know rite of passage. All the guys who are here tonight in this group know about the rite of passage. The fundamental rite of passage is the journey from boy to man for us, right? Now, if you're a man, it means you've accepted as a grown-up and adult of the community, and you need to take certain responsibilities, and instead you get certain freedoms. Now, there are also other things you could do in your life, and you cannot understand them when you're 19, 20 years old. So it's going to take quite a few years for you to grow up enough to understand them. And some things you will never understand because they're not within your archetype or personality type. Some other people will understand it better than you do. So essentially the idea of Tantra is that there are certain things you're not ready for yet. So it's very similar to rite of passage. It's a possible rite of passage later in your life. And sometimes you're not allowed to do it. And that stays with certain religions. With Zoroastrianism and Buddhism, this definition of Tantra Sutra stays. Now, Christianity, you could either view it romantically or you could just view it ambitiously. But Christianity and Islam both try to sort of get rid of the very clear definition between the Tantra and the Sutra. And that therefore try to create around. This is when Christ dies on the cross, and it said that the curtain in the temple fell apart and all of the temple was accessible to the believers. Now, that's a Christian idea. It's up to you here to decide whether you believe in it or not. As a Zoroastrian, I'm skeptical because there are so many genes that should be kept in bottles. I'm a bit with Dostoevsky here. Dostoevsky is more Zoroastrian than Christian, I think, in the sense that certain genies should be kept inside certain bottles. And actually, when we let the genies out of the bottles, we cause havoc. And therefore, in Zoroastrianism, religion is split into three different religions. There is a folk religion, which is very similar to Christianity. That's what Christianity has been included in Zoroastrian systems all along, and so has Judaism. But there's also another religion for the military guys. They certainly need to go into certain realms where nobody else wants to be. You don't want your children close to the sort of violence and shit that goes on during war. And there's another religion for the priests. And the priestly religion, which is called Zoroastrianism in Persia, and it's called Zarakism in the Jewish religion. So in the Jewish and the Zoroastrian religions, the curtain in the temple is, so to speak, kept. And behind the curtain, the priest practices a religion which is called the ultimate truth no matter what. So it's a kind of religion where you go into the arm and say that even if God is dead, we have to accept that God is dead. If that's the ultimate truth, we go with the truth. This is called Asha, for example, in Persia. It was later called Tao when it's imported by the Chinese within Taoism. So this is how the world actually operates. And it's only the priests who have the capacity or the psyche to fully grasp how the world actually operates, no matter how evil or nasty that is. and then go out and perform to the believers as if God existed. It wasn't Jordan Peterson who invented the idea that you could live as if God existed. That's actually a very Eastern idea. So we have a difference here between Tantra and Sutra. And I just recommend you guys to study it and then make your own choice and see what do you actually believe and what do you think is needed for contemporary society.
Yeah, you could also describe that as the difference between esoteric and exoteric, right?
No, I disagree.
Basic church going.
No. Totally disagree on that one. That's another axis altogether. Let's not go there. Tantra and Sutra is nothing about esoteric or exoteric. No, there's a lot of guys who think that if I go into a mystic cult, I'm going to find out truths about anybody else. I call them Harry Potter boys. I think that's ridiculous. I think that actually to be able to handle truth is not about being involved in some kind of mystery where you're engaged in the mystery. It really is about having a psyche that is so strong and so trained by all the hardships of life that you could take the truth no matter what.
Well, I don't think that's an actual disagreement, but we can
esoteric, exoteric, Andrew, you love those definitions and know that, but that's actually just a form.
Because I think maybe you're against the esoteric.
They have nothing to do with each other. Please keep them out. They're forms, right? I'm talking about mindset here. And I'm talking about the guys who are involved here tonight. Where are you at in your life? Be nice to yourself. Go to your own community. That's where I think you all go to your own community and say, this is what I can do at the age I'm at now, and I'm going to be good at that. And maybe as I get older and develop my archetype further, I can go into even more of an understanding of the world. And that's what Tantra and Sutra fundamentally means. There are doors you must not pass until you're ready. That's essentially what Tantra is compared to the Sutra, where the Sutra is the religion of the entire community. The Sutra is beautiful. The Sutra is what keeps the community together. And Sutra must always work first before you do any Tantra at all.
Oh, agreed. Yeah.
I guess maybe it's because, I'm not as expert on Tantra, but it's like let's say, at least my understanding of the esoteric division, you could say, is that one is based on normal duality of existence. And then the esoteric is usually based in some kind of non-duality or like union with the absolute. And my understanding of Tantra that it's also something like that. It engages in non-dual behavior and usually through transgression. And so the idea of transgression in Tantra seems to be related to the idea of assimilating the opposite in order to transcend it, And I think that's maybe I never heard the idea of Tantra the way that Alexander is describing it. But
that's because I come from a religion where we don't talk about non-dual. We just talk about a monist universe. Everything is tied together. So in my religion, we even teach the children that everything is tied to everything else. So we don't have non-dual on those concepts at all. So I don't think that has anything to do with Tantra Sutra. It basically has to do with what are you ready for now in your life? What could you comprehend and handle with care? That's more what I think is the fundamental difference between Tantra and Sutra.
Thomas, can you help us here in this discussion?
Perhaps. So basically the problem, Tantra and Sutra deal with the problem of desire, right? So desire is violence because you want something that somebody else wants, and it will lead to competition, jealousy, envy, and ultimately violence. So what Sutra says is desire is dangerous, and we're gonna curb desire, so we're gonna limit it, and that's very, very necessary. And Christianity is an absolutely crucial religion because it really it revealed a scapegoat mechanism. In that sense, Christianity is absolutely unique. There's nothing like it in any other religions. And other religions, they have their own, let's say they have their own fantastic psychotechnologies, but Christianity is absolutely unique in that it really reveals how dangerous unlimited desire is. But you cannot live completely by giving up desire. And in fact, somebody has done it for you. Jesus Christ has done it. Now, if you want to do a Jesus Christ, and if you want to get killed by a mob and in that way change the world, you're welcome to that. But a tantric would say, well, there is a limit to sutra. At some point, I will have to deal with the fact that I do not want to die. I am not going to just sit here and let the mob kill myself and thereby transform the world. I am going to fight the mob. I have desires. I find it important to have, for example, a beautiful house or to buy art or to buy a good bottle of wine. And you totally engage with that desire. But of course, because you have done your sutric practice, you know which desires will be, let's say, constructive and will not lead to scapegoating and violence, and which desires need to be safely locked up in their, let's say, in their sutric containment. And that's basically the interplay between sutra and tantra. And basically, you cannot have a decent sutra without tantra. You cannot have a decent tantra without sutra. They have to arise at the same point. That would be my 5 cents.
So I mean, it's just, I don't know. To me, maybe it's because, like I said, I mean, I don't understand Tantra very well, but it seems to me that the imagery of Tantra is usually an image of scandalous desire, that it's not just desire, right? I remember you mentioned someone eating fish guts. Well, eating fish guts is not pleasant. It's actually not meant to be pleasant. There's something of it.
Sorry, Jonathan. That's not actually true. It's not always transgressive. It can be extremely beautiful as well. It can be just sensual beauty at its maximum. But it can also be full of violence and transgression.
I think Jonathan makes a good point here. But for a Christian, I mean, Jesus is the ultimate scandal. Jesus is.
Yeah.
No,
I agree. That's why
exactly the same idea. I mean, Jesus created the world's biggest scandal.
Yeah,
that's a very tantric idea. It's like you do something that is absolutely forbidden, like it's a transgression, and in that way somehow you turn it into something that is actually incredibly beautiful, and it creates a certain. It creates you can call it art, or it creates a situation that is transcendent.
So what is the difference?
Wait, I'll explain the transgression part of it. The reason why transgression is often associated with Tantra is simply because we mimic each other all the time. This is why I strongly agree with Girard and with Thomas here. We mimic each other all the time. And Sutra is very much about how you contain the mimicry that goes on all the time in human society. Now, the problem is when you move into the Tantric realm, you must no longer mimic, because then you're not Tantric. That's why you get crazy wisdom teachers. And the crazy wisdom teachers, they will on purpose transgress all your values, and they will, they'll do all the things we associate with Tantras, and Tantra is an excuse to do all this dirty shit or whatever it is. No, it isn't really. What happens is that in crazy wisdom, then the teacher does things you cannot mimic. Doesn't make any sense to mimic. And it forces you to become your own being. So it forces you to be different. It forces you to no longer mimic, and therefore you contain yourself, and you get a sense of self that is much stronger than one in the Sutra realm. And you can go, for example, into leadership or take responsibilities for the tribe or the community you could never do before. So it's not the transgression itself that's interesting in Tantra. It's that the crazy wisdom teachers transgress to piss you off, basically. They fuck your wife or whatever, so that you can no longer mimic them. And because you can't mimic them, you have to find your own identity.
Jonathan, you were going to say something.
So which one of those are tantric? The crazy wisdom guy or the guy who has...
Crazy wisdom is only in the tantric realm. It's never sutric at all. We all mimic each other.
But the crazy wisdom guy doesn't become a leader?
No. The crazy wisdom guy is a teacher, is assigned from the leadership. They must never be leaders. The crazy wisdom guys are guys you only find at the tantric realm, and they've done the entire journey. And they're shamans. We call them shamans in other cultures more neutrally. And what they do is that they teach you in between all the madness you get out of them. You get the beautiful, most beautiful ideas. You can actually turn into your own and then develop further. So for philosophers and artists and other things like that, crazy wisdom is necessary, because without thinking the transgression, you cannot do art. You can't do anything that's meaningful in that context. But the point here is that in the tantric realm, we have the crazy wisdom, is that you cannot mimic the crazy wisdom teacher. That's what Tantra deals with. You have to find yourself.
So, I mean, we have holy fools in Christianity that are kind of have that role, let's say. But that's why I don't totally understand. I struggle, because on the one hand, you talk about how Tantra can lead you into being yourself so that you can, let's say, become a leader, become something. But then these characters are very different. Like the holy clown and the holy fool is very different. They actually are somewhat self-effacing. Like they actually engage in acts of self-negation to a very large extent, and negation in general, in order to reach what I would call non-duality.
But there are two things here. One thing is that crazy wisdom teachers also foster future crazy wisdom teachers who also do not become leaders, become crazy wisdom teachers. That's one thing. The other thing is that Christianity has tried to do everything in the social and in the open. Christianity's ambition is basically to take the town square and let all of spiritual life happen in the town square. It's a very democratic way of thinking religion. That's the strength of
We
Christianity.
have priests.
The question is then whether it works or not, and that's up to each person to decide, I would say, because you have different types of societies, and at the end of the day, you need to judge them on their own merits, and whether you do cultural studies or whatever, and say this society where women and men are equal and both successful and they seem to be prosperous or whatever. At the end of the day, you all have to make these comparisons, make your own choices. Right?
You shouldn't misrepresent, though, because like in my church, there's a wall. There's a literal wall between me and the altar. And then the priests go behind that wall, and I'm not allowed to go there unless they give me permission to go there.
Listen, Jonathan, I could sit here for the next 2 hours and talk about Zoroastrianism constantly for 2 hours too.
But I'm not trying to misrepresent Zoroastrianism.
No, but I don't want to have a discussion on Christianity only. I want to have a more neutral discussion on religion and the apocalypse. That's the theme of the night, okay?
Yeah.
So instead of just constantly defending Christianity, just go into realm together where we develop these religions together and present them together.
I'm just detecting your misrepresentation is all I'm trying to do. Not trying to, I'm just saying that's not what it is.
God, you don't even know about Zoroastrianism.
No, you're right. I don't.
Okay.
No,
this is turning into a pissing contest. Everybody calm down.
You're just ignoring something because you don't know it. I mean, for God's sake. If I do misrepresent it, just let it be for a while. So
okay, I'll let it be for a while.
Thank
Alexander.
you.
No, I think the Holy Fool and the Crazy Wisdom Master, express non-dual wisdom, which can't be defined in any way whatsoever. So you can't say they're a leader or not a leader. That would be my position. Yeah. I mean, you can't put them in any kind of box of any kind.
Well, let's put it this way. The leader who leads the leader cannot be a leader himself. The leader leads the leader is a non-leader. That's precisely the point of crazy wisdom, at least in the crazy wisdom traditions.
Yeah. Like
you walk out into the forest to see the shaman. The shaman will never go into the square. The shaman will create absolute madness if he walked into the square. He would cause havoc, right? So you keep the shaman in the forest, but that's precisely why you go to the shaman to learn from him. The equivalent to that in Christianity is when Christ goes into the desert on his own to see angels or whatever before he goes into the realm of the source.
Yeah, or not just that, but you have, for example, the Middle Ages, many churches would have an ascetic who would be walled into the church and would just live there in secret inside the church. And then they would not have any, they wouldn't be in society. They would just basically be this hidden person who just lives a life of complete ascesis and prayer. And so would act as this kind of secret reason. Like they wouldn't be the leader, like you said, they wouldn't have an official role. They weren't part of the clergy. They could even be women. Like they could be these women that were basically just walled up in the church and would actually sometimes change the fate of Europe because they were so revered as being this kind of secret influence in the world. You find them in all religions. In Persia, they're called Zautar. So this is something that religion in general has in common. You find these characters everywhere.
I have a question for Jonathan about that because it seems that what I call exoteric Christianity, it's hard to find that kind of thing in the West. And I wonder why that's been lost in Christianity. Maybe it hasn't, and maybe I'm totally wrong, but I know it's there. But I'm not. Where's Meister Eckhart, and where are these people today? And is it going to come back? Has Christianity died, and is it going to be reborn? And
like on Mount Athos right now is full of monks. Some live in caves up and they have the secrets of the naked ascetics that live up in the mountains outside even of their cave that no one has seen, who appear suddenly in strange ways to kind of bring messages, who appear in dreams and stuff. Yeah. Like all of this is there. It's just that it's not in
it's not there in the Protestant West, perhaps.
It's not in your Pentecostal concert church, right? It's obviously in the churches that are more attached to the mystical tradition.
Yeah.
Like in Ethiopia, my goodness, the stuff that's in Ethiopia right now, like it's amazing in terms of this whole idea of these secret monks, like these secret monks that live in caves and they all meet together and dream to decide who like the next guardian of the Ark of the Covenant will be. It's like the mythological world is still there. It's just that it's harder access to us because we live in this kind of very secular world, but it's still around.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. But I think the death of God is kind of a Western thing, isn't it? It kind of happened in the West.
Yeah, and it's based in our materialism and our scientism and our.
No, No,
You don't think so?
No, okay, Thomas, here.
Thomas.
It's completely misunderstood. I mean, the Christianity is the death of God. I mean, he literally dies on the cross. It's an inverse myth. The God that dies that's the pagan God. The pagan gods are that there are no more pagan gods that you can just resurrect every month by doing sacrifices. That's why we are in apocalyptic times. So the only thing that you can do is either come up with a religion that doesn't need paganism anymore, that doesn't need gods anymore. Monotheism is very close to atheism. It's basically saying no to this proliferation of idols and deities all over the place. That's the death of God.
But it's not a necessarily Christian thing, because in the Christian church, there are statues of saints everywhere, and there are icons, and there are angels, and there's like prayers to angels, prayer to your guardian angel. There are relics that perform miracles. There are all these things are all there. And so
which death of God are we talking about?
That is basically, they point to the same direction. That is, stop putting other people in the position of a god, because then you're going to go in competition with them. It's all fine that you have relics and icons and stuff like that if you know what you're doing. In a sense, you can say like you're already deeply in the tantric realm, right? A Christian who worships saints and stuff like that is kind of like going back to paganism in some sense, but doing it in a skillful way that is actually benefiting the religion. But it's a constant battle, and that's all over the world, right? You can find it in Islam, you can find it in Buddhism, you find it in Christianity. It's a constant battle not to go back to archaic religion, because if we go back to archaic religion on a vast scale, it's the end game. It's all over, because that's the nuclear holocaust. That's why we are in apocalyptic times. And any religion that has a sense of the difference between a sutric religion and paganism is helping there. And all big religions all decent religions have that. Islam has that, Buddhism has that, Hinduism has that, Zoroastrianism has that, and Christianity has that. But all religions are constantly battling with people who turn their teachings into paganism. They basically turn it into a parody, and then you have like people who say like, I'm a Christian, so I kill people who do abortions, or I burn witches, or whatever. I mean, and that can go very far. Like if you want to have an example of what paganism can do, Nazi Germany was a return to paganism. Yeah. That was a brutal return to paganism. That is where you're going to kind of willfully say, we are pagans and we're going to bring it back and we're going to kick out Christianity. And that's what happens.
But I think there has to be this transformation of the polytheistic world into the religion, rather than a stark separation between the two, which seems very Protestant. And
Christianity, I think Orthodox Christianity is closer to Hinduism. Like it's very similar to Hinduism in the sense that it has both this absolute recognition of the infinite, one and source of all. But then there's also a sense in which we celebrate the multiplicity, and we celebrate these principalities that are joined to the one, let's say. So there's a sense in also that there are demons and principalities that are wild and don't want to participate in the pattern. And then there are those that do, and we celebrate them, and we celebrate them because they manifest for us the transcendental one in their particular sphere. Like when you read the hymns of the saints, they're really interesting that way, because they'll say, glory to you, oh, whatever saint, because you manifest for us the love of the supreme God. So it's like, and then you move up and down, like in that the kind of hierarchy of being.
Yeah, so that you can go just to Persia in that case, or the Jews. So Orthodox Christianity is definitely closer to Judaism and Zoroastrianism than the other forms of Christianity are. Yeah. Precisely in the sense you described here, Jonathan. So
the Zoroastrians, do they have saints? How do they have this multiple aspects?
No, they have the lesser gods, which essentially folk religion. You can believe anything you like. If you want to worship Marilyn Monroe, Michael Jackson, go ahead. They don't mind. That's exactly why universal human rights started with Zoroastrianism, because you're okay to have a folk religion if the folk religion keeps the sutric community together, and if women take care of the children and men go out in the world and work hard, fine. You believe anything you like. That's why polytheism and monotheism are not opposites. They are different levels of a society. Yeah. And when you then think, what Zoroastrianism did was that it started to think empire. It started to think, what would be the highest form of human civilization where tribes could actually communicate one another peacefully? And then within the empire, they developed the nation. They sponsored the Second Temple of Jerusalem, precisely so the Jews could create the first proper nation. Judaism invented nationalism, invented the nation, invented the national religion, which was contained within the Zoroastrian religion. The point was that you can have religion on many different levels. It all depends on what are you ready for. And this is the ultimate form of doing Tantra Sutra, say that the priests can handle certain truths, and maybe they should handle the ultimate truth. So we trust them. They talk to God in the sense that if God is dead, they would even know that they would talk to God in that realm as well. They can then go back and represent us. And what the priests then always tell the people is that you must love each other. That's the ultimate divine. This is the closest between Zoroastrianism and Christianity is the Holy Ghost. But the Holy Ghost is the third part of the Trinity. That is the congregation itself. The congregation becomes divine through the love that the members of the community have towards each other. This is called the bedding principle in Zoroastrianism, and it's inherited by Christianity through the Holy Ghost.
How is that related to the Holy Ghost?
We don't necessarily need the Holy Ghost, though, but we do have deification. Like we do have the notion that the body is deified, but not just the body, but also all of creation is moving towards deification. That for sure is, especially in the mystical tradition in the East, is for sure something that is inevitable, but it won't necessarily. They won't necessarily identify that with the Holy Ghost, but let's say the Holy Spirit will be that which indwells and fills all of creation, so that it then is joined up into divine participation, for sure.
Yeah, but we shouldn't be surprised there's so many similarities here. I think that's actually also what this conversation is really fruitful and creative.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, what is the Holy Ghost, Jonathan? What was that exactly? What does that mean?
What is the Holy Ghost?
Sorry, I've never really understood that.
Who's that guy? Who's that Holy Ghost guy? And so, I mean, I think that a good way to understand the notion of the Trinity for people, it's especially related to love in the way that Alexander mentioned, is that, let's say, the Trinity is the highest expression of love, because first of all, it's not dual, right? It's three. But it's also in a certain manner two which are bound through another one. And so it's this dynamic relationship. So it expresses the unity in love because it's not one, it's not two, it's both three and one at the same time. So the Holy Spirit is that, you could say, think of it like that you have the infinite, and then you have the logos, which is the principle of manifestation, and then that which binds the infinite to the principle of manifestation, that's the Holy Spirit. So it's the love between the Father and the Son. You've heard people say it that way. And so it's like the Holy Spirit is a love between the Father and the Son, but it's also, it's a hypostasis in itself. It's something in itself. It's not just a bond. It's actually something. And so, but Trinitarian theology is something that I always avoid.
You will find Trinities in all the monotheistic religions, ironically. So the Trinity in Judaism is actually the three siblings who lead the Exodus out of Egypt. It was Moses, Aaron, and Miriam. And it's very often two men and a woman. And the woman is the matriarch to which the two brothers are responsible. So Miriam is older than the two brothers. And Moses and Aaron in Judaism uniquely take on two priestly roles, but usually it's a priest and a chief, or a priest and a king. And in Zoroastrianism, it's literally the priest and the king. So the highest priest is the Mabed and Mabed of the Persian Empire. The highest king is the Shah and Shah, the king of all kings. They must never live in the same city. They must always have separate courts. So the phallus is split, so to speak. But the phallus is then represented through the people as the third position. So what happens in Christianity instead is that in the abstract form of Christianity, we have Father, Son, and Spirit. But actually, pop religion version of Christianity, because it's hard to worship the Holy Ghost, nobody ever does, you instead take Virgin Mary into that role. And that I find interesting because it's so fundamentally human to let a woman, a matriarch, the mother of God herself, to take that role. And that's why pop religion versions of Christianity worship the Father, the Son, and the Mother. And that's so deeply human. But you find the Trinity at the core of every form of monotheism. The God itself is always split. God must always be split. And for men, I would advise to say that in all religions, when it comes to men, the phallus is split between the most amazing body in there, the warrior, the king, and the most amazing mind in there, who's the priest. And this is also a pattern you see in Judaism and Christianity very strongly.
And also Jung used to say that the 3 is a dynamic number, right? Whereas the 4, so it's the masculine, which is always kind of incomplete. It always has what Cattle calls a lack or something, and then which might be the ghost. And then the 4. Let me finish, please. And then the 4 is the feminine number, which is a completion. number. Yeah, it's complete.
It's just dialectics. So to make dialectics move, you must be three. My critique of Taoism is that you end up with the yin and the yang, but the question is, what makes the yin and the yang dance? And that has to be third force. And that I think where Christians agree with me, that without the third aspect of it, the spirit, there's no relation between the Father and Son.
So you want to hear Girard's take on the Holy Spirit?
Yes.
Pretty interesting. So the Paraclete, I think it's Greek, and it basically means...
Thomas, can you speak into your microphone? Because you're way more quiet than everybody else.
Yeah, but that's entirely appropriate, isn't it? Anyway, the Paraclete, as far as I know, it's Greek. And so Girard points out it actually means something. It means the lawyer for the defense. And he juxtaposes that with Satan, which is the accuser. And then basically you have a very simple interpretation of this. And that is that the mob that gangs up on the scapegoat, that's a satanic mechanism, and is a defender of the victims. That's basically the Holy Spirit. So that's a very, very down-to-earth interpretation. I'm not saying that that's the only interpretation, but it does point to the absolute core of Christianity. Again, it's this fundamental anthropology of the cross, as Girard calls it. And I find that, I'm an engineer, right? And I'm also not I'm not here to defend a certain religion. I mean, I have my own practices. But what I really like about Girard's take on Christianity and other religions, he's also written a book about the Vedas. So he was moving into Eastern religions at the end of his life. What I really like about the Girardian view is that you start understanding why religions are there and why you cannot get rid of them. And that a lot of religions, even if they might not look so appealing to you, but they are trying to accomplish the same thing. And that is that it seems that everybody on the planet, with very few exceptions, seems to agree that we don't want to go back to archaic religion. Everybody seems to agree with that. And then what happens again and again, for example, if you have people who kind of have lost their religion and you cross-link them worldwide on digital networks, so that's undifferentiation, they go into competition, and then you have archaic religion coming back, and that's the kind of the real enemy. It's like it's a stupidity, just like Jesus said, right? Father, forgive them, they don't know what they're doing. That's what's going on. People form mobs. People they rediscover archaic religion, and they're not aware of it. That's the real thing.
Yeah, for sure. The woke situation is just coming right up to this weird pagan scapegoat mechanism. And it's also kind of so out of control because it's weirdly self-devouring. And, it's like people form a mob and then go after someone and then they start to attack each other inside the mob. And it's just it's like, if you want an image of chaos, man, that's it.
It's so obvious. And the problem is that this can, so this is what Alexander calls the unoject, right? So some smart person or maybe not so smart person might channel all that aggression and channel it into an extremely terrible direction, right? That's what happened with Hitler. We've seen that in a lot of communist countries, that somebody stands up and just starts channeling the chaotic aggression of the mob. That is a real danger.
I think Michael Butler addressed the question. If I may jump to it, we're going to have question and answer later, but I think it's absolutely right. The internet in this sense actually has a very pagan structure to it because it just flattened the world completely. So in a way, if we speak about the death of God, I prefer to speak about the death of a paradigm. I don't think God ever dies. I think we just move from one God to the next, and it's probably the same God at the end of the day anyway. But the death of the paradigm means that a certain paradigm no longer works, and the values that are tied to that paradigm no longer works. And because the internet's taken over the world completely, and it's flattened it, and everybody screams to the top of the lungs, and the 8 billion people out there with megaphones all of a sudden, it's a very, very pagan structure. Let's put it that way. So the apocalyptic about the times we live in is that technology itself has put the lynch mobs back in there. And because we've then trained people to think that God is dead, and God is now dead on a massive scale, and they've all been trained to think they're secular atheists and individualists and believe in themselves, as if the Cartesian cogito was a better God than the Christian God, which is ridiculous. It's way worse. I think individualism is a terrible religion. I think it's worse than anything we've ever had before. I think individualism being taught to 8 billion people at the same time, putting them at enormous mimetic rivalry with one another, is really doomed to fail. And that's why we have these discussions now, and we get men together now to try to go back to religion and try to stop this from happening.
Okay, so my next question then to everybody here is what about this return to religion? Like, is this happening? I mean, in some sense, Girard was kind of talking about religion becoming secularized as a continuation of Christianity. So is religion going to come back, and is it going to come back in a totally new way?
I think to begin with, we must recognize there always was religion, just bad religion. Individualism is a religion. Nationalism is a religion. Capitalism is a religion. Socialism is a religion. We're surrounded by religions all the time. Commercialism is a religion. Scientology is probably the most honest of all religions today because it is capitalism. You pay to go to another planet to live after you're dead. Okay, those are all religions. They're just bad religions. The question is not whether we left religion or not. We just have terrible religions. We need better religions that are truer and also can save us.
Well, I think for sure there is a sense in which, let's say, at least in the imagination of people, even though I agree with Alexander that it's a delusion, but there is a manner in which, at least in their imagination, in the narrative, they were moving away from religion. And so, right, the idea of secularization, the idea of kind of separation of religion and state, and then the state is becoming more powerful and the secular world is taking over. The advent of entertainment as replacing religious ritual. All these things are not a-religious truly, but at least in the way that they try to perceive themselves and try to act, that's what they say they are. And especially scientific materialism pretends as if it's a-religious. And so I think that what it's done is created this kind of chaotic place where everybody has their little idol. And there's all these little idols kind of floating around and everybody follows their little idol. But the breakdown of that is becoming more and more apparent, like as Thomas talks about. This kind of breakdown into differentiation is now bringing about the urge, let's say, I don't know how else to say it, like this urge to cohere again, and this desire to find places to cohere. And then in that moment, I think that religion it's coming back. And it's not only coming back in the sense that even in terms of the different sciences and in terms of the different fields, all of a sudden the things that the secular materialist has negated can't be negated anymore, right? With Cog-sci and the problems in quantum and all this stuff, it's like, okay, we can't, the types of statements we used to make, we cannot make them anymore. And so even that discourse is breaking down and fragmenting, and it's leaving people in a state where they don't really know where to look. And so the popularity of, let's say, spiritual but not religious, the popularity of all these this new age bullshit, and even the popularity of like going to any religion except for our own, because it's like, I still hate religion, but I somewhat feel I need it. So it's like, I'll go to India. And then that way I feel like it's okay to be part of a religion. But I think it's just coming back. It's been coming back maybe since like the late 60s, early 70s, but now there's an acceleration where even if in the late 60s and 70s, it was like the elites that were in this world, and the normal people were still kind of going to church in a milquetoast way, had no real sense of what they were doing. They're just kind of following along. Now, most of those people aren't going to church anymore. The breakdown is much at a deeper level. And so I think we're seeing a lot of stuff going around us is showing us that religion is seeping back in, and not necessarily for the best, let's say, at least for now.
No, I think there are two ways it can go. So it depends on how conscious we are of what's going on. I'm a big proponent what's called paradigmatics. And paradigmatics means that there are timeless things about what it means to be human, must define those first. That's the constant of values. There are also time-specific values you must define. For example, how we handle a technology like the internet and AI and atomic bombs and climate change or whatever. That's paradigmatics. And in terms of religion, that means there are reformations. And reformation doesn't mean improvement. Reformation just means that religion reforms according to the new paradigm. It doesn't try to flatter people. When you try to flatter people, your religion dies. Rather, it's the other way around. What's scary these days is that the most adamant dominant, most fundamentalist versions, the ones that offer you the simple solutions to complex problems, are the religions that attract people the most. And if we don't want to go down that route, which I think is a road to hell, if anything, we need to be more conscious of the decisions we make. But on the other hand, if you're going to return to religion or return to religions, some of us have done so here, then we must also return to reformed versions of the religions, not improved, not adjusted to the times we live in, rather even more radically against the times we live in, but truthful. So, for example, can you do Christianity for the internet age? Good question. Can you do Judaism and Zoroastrianism for the internet age? Good question. Can you do Hinduism or Islam for the internet age? Good question. I think if the internet age is where we're heading, we have to, each religion has to ask itself, can there be a version of that religion or form version that actually makes sense and is truthful? And can it, in that case, fight both the lynch mobs and the scapegoat mechanism, and also fight against the populism of simple solutions? Because otherwise, the simple solutions are going to win, and that's going to create war, nothing else.
Yeah, but
go ahead.
Great. Go ahead, Andrew.
Well, I was just wondering about this idea of this hyper-rationalism on one hand, and then this new age spiritualism on the other, and there being, kind of one sort of dynamic, and the problem being literalism in a sense, like and not understanding, a lot of what Jonathan talks about is the mythos of religion, as well as the logos, and the pathos of it as well. But yeah.
The problem is that I think it's funny because in this moment, I maybe come closer to Alexander in the sense that one of the problems is the lack of hierarchy. And so in a normal world, you would have an elite that would be the monks, the priests, they would be the theologians who would really understand, the highest mysteries and the highest aspect of what the religion offers. And then you would have the peasant that don't ask them what they believe, because they'll tell you stupid crap. Like they'll tell you they'll tell you things that don't make sense. They'll tell you superstitions. But the thing is that it's fine. It's okay, because not everybody is super smart, and that's completely normal. As long as the peasant that barely understands what they're doing is held together in this hierarchy and is linked to people and to things that really understand and participate in the higher mysteries, then it should be okay. Now, the problem is that what's happened is that religion has devolved into the lowest version of itself, especially kind of, let's say, kind of modern evangelical American type Christianity has devolved to the lower versions of itself, where exactly it's this like annoying, boring literalism that really you don't even know why you would believe it in the first place. That's where it is. And so that's what we hear. And also because the people that, one of the other problems that the people that hate religion, they'll magnify those voices too. Like they'll argue with these idiots, these idiot pastors that are complete morons. I think the solution is more like a hierarchy. It's to have saints and to have people that really do experience these higher mysteries, and then also don't see themselves in opposition to the normal people. Don't feel like they have to actually the normal people and tell them how stupid they are. Just let them be, let them do their thing. As long as it's all kind of held together, it's fine. It's fine if your aunt has the most superstitious version of their belief, as long as she's not in charge.
Yeah, I totally agree with that myself. Yeah.
I don't think there was a reason why religion would have developed, to be absolutely honest about it. The thing is this, when everything is written down, very few people have access to stuff, right? So the people are pretty smart. If we haven't gotten any smarter the last 5,000 years, our brain sizes, if anything, shrunk, right? So when everything is written down, or even if you just, the real secret religions like Zoroastrianism, for example, is only oral, right? It's never written down because it's so tantric and so sacred that it must have been written down. Because if it's written down, it's like Instagram, once the picture's out there, the whole world knows about it, and it's all vulgarized, right? So the problem is this, that because of the printing press, because of the internet, because of mass duplication, because everything is mass duplicated and spread all over the place and vulgarized because of it, it loses its value. But also, it's also more misunderstood. understood. I don't mind if something was valuable when it wasn't original and suddenly it was duplicated so more people had access to it. That was democratic. But the problem is when people get access to shit they don't understand and they completely misunderstand it. I mean, how many of the people who interpret the Bible today even understand what the Bible is? Hardly anybody. So the problem is that as we didn't get smarter, we had more access to religious artifacts. They got cheaper and cheaper. They got more and more vulgar and were more and more misunderstood. So whereas technology has developed upwards over 5,000 years, religion has gone downwards after 5,000 years. And that is the apocalypse today. It's fundamentally that everybody thinks they understand how to talk to God, although they have no idea what they're talking about.
Okay, let's start at the beginning then, and ask this question: what the hell is God? What do we mean by God? Because everybody has a different idea of that as well.
You think everybody has a different idea? I don't.
Well,
think so.
I think a lot of people have a different idea. I mean, when I hear a Christian fundamentalist, the God that or when I hear an atheist, the God that he doesn't believe in, I don't believe in either. But
can I propose a foundation for that? We can just go to nomadological religion. God is essentially the name for the ultimate Urfather. So it's ahead of you. The fathers have walked ahead of you. They're ahead of you. You're set to follow them. You're on the move all the time. It's also exodology in Judaism. You leave the old, walking in the new. And God is just the name of where you're going. The promised land is.
I also disagree.
No, that's where you build the temple of God. Why would you build the temple in the promised land? You walk towards a specific place where God is supposed to live, or the goddess which is behind you. So God and goddess fundamentally is where you're going and where you're coming from. It's just fundamentally. You can then have other versions of God. Jonathan, Thomas, you're welcome.
Let's hear the disagreements here. Let's.
I mean, I think that at least in like the highest Christian understanding, God is the infinite source of all being. That's the best way to understand God, and therefore is actually beyond all name and all definition. It is that towards which all goods lead to, and is beyond that. And so it's actually an apophatic definition of God. And so there's a manner in which God, at least in my understanding of traditional Christianity, that the way in which God appears is something like the Father. And I totally agree. But there's also like a secret aspect which you hear in the fathers, which is that there's also a notion of the womb of God, that there's an idea of like divine darkness or that which out of which God, the essence of God, maybe is a way to say. And so God actually contains mysteriously, apophatically, both the masculine and feminine, both heaven and earth, you could say. So God creates heaven and earth and appears as the God in heaven, but also contains all of it.
Thomas.
Well, I'm not only obsessed with Girard. Actually, I'm also obsessed with a guy called Whitehead. But I rarely talk about him because nobody reads Whitehead. Nobody wants to hear. But I'd like to say two things. First of all, God is something that should, to a great extent, be an open, undefined thing. I think that a religious person is somebody who thinks that God is something worth discussing. And I think it's very, very important not to over-define God, because then it becomes an idol. Then it becomes, there's a God up there and he tells me what to do. And then you're back to paganism, right? Back to square one. So that's one thing. But there's another. But let me kind of run the risk of making God a bit more concrete. And so the God of Whitehead is actually the entity in his philosophy, because in Whitehead's philosophy, everything has its place, right? You can't just say stuff always comes from somewhere. And so the core of Whitehead's philosophy is basically a philosophy of value, of value decision. So we as individuals, we constantly have this potential in front of us, and we make choices, right? We could do this or we could do that, and it's this. So in Whitehead's system, God is needed to provide this potential, to provide this value system that we constantly fall into, right? You may always make a decision, and after you make a decision, there's again this panorama of options, right? So and basically, Whitehead's God it's a philosophical God, it's a technical God, but it's very much in your face, so to say. So you are actually, so when you see this potential in front of you, there's this range of choices that you can make. and that you constantly need to make a choice. So for Whitehead, that's basically God providing you with a potential.
So God's the ultimate value. Is that what you're saying?
God, well, not the ultimate value. God is a range of values, because God needs you to make decisions. God integrates the whole world and presents value, but you need to present God with your decision. So it's kind of like you cannot decouple the world from God. You can say that the world is in God or God is in the world. It's the same thing. And these are ideas that are very close to, so you find this also, similar ideas in Buddhism, but also in ancient Christianity. The God of ancient Christianity, of Orthodox Christianity, is an immanent God. It's a God that is very much in the world. It's not God is not up there in heaven, which the God up in heaven looking down is very much the kind of like the let's say the Protestant way of looking at things. So yeah, that would be, these are my two.
I can add to that. I can add to that, which is both the Zoroastrian and Hegelian concept of God. So the Zoroastrian concept of God is Ahura and Masta, so two different aspects of God. Ahura is just being. Whatever exists, has existence, is Ahura. It's called pantheism as well. The other is, but it's also split. It's also Masta. Masta is that which has sense, mind. So it means mind. The word mind comes literally from Minu, which is Persian, which is also the word for Masta. So there's mind and there's being. And this is inherited in Western thinking by Hegel. Because to Hegel, he starts a philosophy with their substance and their subject. So there's a subject that can project substantiality onto substance. Although substance is there, and out of substance comes subject. So subject and substance are in relationship with one another, and that is Ahura Mazda Zoroastrianism. That's another way of looking at God.
Yeah, I didn't know that Ahura Mazda meant mind being. It's a great name for God. It's a beautiful.
Ahura comes from being, or sense, and Masta means mind. And that's why the Zoroastrians decide that they're Masta Yasna. They decide that they worship mind more than being, where they accept that other religions, for example, like Christianity and Buddhism, they regard as Ahura Yasna, meaning they worship being more than mind. And that's okay. You can choose. And that's what Zoroastrianism, Buddhism operated for long periods of time in peace with one another, because it was essentially choice. You can be a Buddhist and be Ahura Yasna, according to the persons, or you can be a Zoroastrian, in which case you're a Masta Yasna. It's just two different options you can make.
Yeah, so Buddhism is about being, and then Western religion is about event, and right?
Yes, exactly. It's process and event, exactly. Ahura is the process and Masta is the event. Exactly. Yes.
Mm-hmm. Well, for sure, I think that, like, for example, in St. Gregory of Nyssa, you have a sense in which being is logos, right? And then mind would be God, would be the Father. And so you have the source of logos, which is, the manner with the logos is contained in the Father, and then proceeds from the Father.
Yeah, but this is confusing, because this is why we talk about the Greek logos and the Hebrew logos. So the Hebrew logos, this is absolutely correct. When it comes to the Greek logos, which was inherited from the Zoroastrians through Heraclitus, when he presented the logos, actually the opposite. Logos is the mind that makes something, and pathos is being. Pathos is how the world operates without that's the chaos of the world before an order, a mind comes into the world and creates order out of chaos. So ironically, if you interpret the beginning of the Jewish Bible and therefore also the Christian Bible, first there was chaos, and out of chaos, God created order, and that was the ordered world. And that is the logos that the Greeks talk about. So we always talk about the Greek logos and the Hebrew logos. They're both correct, but they're two different interpretations of the logos.
You want to finish your thought, Jonathan?
Who, me? I think I finished my thought. Although I'm not sure I agree with that the way he defined it, but that's fine. That's totally fine. It's not a big deal.
So in which way do you disagree? Do you want to put that forward?
Let's say, you could say there is pathos, or there is the chaos, and then there's logos, and then there's also the source of logos, or the God, or God, let's say, or the Father. So I'd say that that's really more both the Jewish way of understanding and the Christian way of understanding. So you have God above that speaks, and then that speech orders chaos into being. Right? That's what you see in Genesis 1. That's what you see in the first chapter of John. So to me, I don't know where you get the way that you talk about.
No, it's more because it returns to the triad you talk about that you represent with the Trinity and Christianity. And the triad is actually three different stories being told that are all true. It's a logos, mythos, and pathos. And in Judaism, Miriam, the sister, represents the mythos. The feminine is always in the mythos. And therefore, the logos and the pathos can be split. Like the masculine brain is constantly a struggle between the logos and the pathos, and supposedly the female brain unites the two into a mythos. And because we always have to retell the story about ourselves, which is the mythos, for example, the Exodus, then we can go back into the logos and the pathos. And the three together constitute fundamentally, I think, the dialectics of religion. That I find in Christianity, Judaism, Islam, and Zoroastrianism. They all share this idea of the three different narratives.
Yeah, I don't know. I'm not sure. I'm not sure. I see the relationship between the two, but it seems like I don't want to start arguing over things like that, because it's not going to be. I don't think it's going to be very fruitful. Probably better to move on to another.
Okay, next question. Yeah. So my next question is in the Eastern traditions, there's a lot of talk about enlightenment. Maybe in Orthodox tradition, you talk about apotheosis. Or realization of God. So that's my next question. What is enlightenment? What is apotheosis? What does that mean?
Well, in Christianity, it's deification or theosis. That is, the idea is that the reason for the world to exist. So the logos, right? The reason for reality to exist is the incarnation. That's actually why God created the world. And so Christ is the reason for the world. Christ not in just the limited sense of Jesus of Nazareth, but Christ in the sense of the incarnation, the joining of man and God together. And so we are called to participate in that. And not only us, but through us, all of reality is called to be divinized. And so it's seen as basically the final, let's say, sexual union between God and his creation, this final moment of joining, where all of reality will cohere and be united to its source. And it's also a returning to, right? It's also something like a precession return pattern that you see in Neoplatonism, which is that kind of out of this outflowing love, God overflows and creates, and then brings that creation back into himself without destroying it, but rather joining it to his own energies, to his own will. And so that's what enlightenment is for the individual. So someone can participate in that in their life. They can become divinized. They can become God. And then ultimately, that's the final purpose of all of creation.
Is that the same view as in the Catholic and the Protestant tradition? I mean,
they probably wouldn't express it so explicitly. They tend to use words like united with God and everything, but that it's there. Like it's there even in Thomas and in Aquinas, the idea of deification, it's just not emphasized so much. Whereas in Eastern Christianity, through Saint Gregory of Palamas, who basically who reinvigorated this idea in the 14th century, that really we are called to be deified, that's the reason for everything.
There's no similar concept in Zoroastrianism, and neither in Hegel and Whitehead. So they basically say that's death. You die, and the trick is to die with grace. It's called harvatat, meaning having lived a full and complete life. And then before you die, you can pass on your heritage to the next generation. It's called ameritat, which is the word for transcendence. So that goes on infinitely. So they don't have that stopping point where you get reunified with God. You basically, you're born and you die. So you exist in between, but there's no goal to that, which is one of the ideas of Christianity.
Yeah, but it's not a stopping point. It's especially in St. Gregory of Nyssa, it's represented as an infinite ascent, or as an infinite indwelling, as a moving in infinitely towards the divine, because the divine is all in some manners always somewhat inaccessible because it's uncreated and it's infinite. And so it's actually like a kind of, you can saw like a glory to glory, an infinite movement from glory to glory. So it's not a stopping point, like you see in cartoons where it's just a bunch of people sitting on clouds with wings and harps. It really is this kind of this dynamic ascension into the divine.
That's because I was fostered Protestant Christianity, because this is where you disagree with them. And I embrace it. I think it's great because today we're fighting utopianism, we're fighting dystopianism. So we're fighting the dystopianism of climate change and atomic bombs are all going down, and the Greta Thunbergs of the world who would do nothing about it except actually enjoy the dystopia, right? And utopianism then comes through the door, which is, of course, the simple solution to difficult problems. I propose something called protopianism. This is where we agree. Protopianism means that you infinitely climb towards something higher all the time. It doesn't have an end goal. And that's, in that case, this is an interesting point where Zoroastrianism and Orthodox Christianity strongly.
Tantra as well, I would say.
Yes, exactly.
Enlightenment is not an end, nirvana, where everything just ends. It's sort of the beginning, actually.
It would be similar to Hegel's absolute knowledge in that case, which I think is something I would buy into. Yes.
So, Thomas, what do you think of?
Yeah, we're waiting for Thomas here.
of elimination or deification.
I want to be modest about it,
Good call. Good call.
Well, there's a. Well, I mean, this is very much something that goes on in more Sutric Buddhism, the Enlightenment and stuff like that. But in Tantra, samsara is nirvana, right? It's basically Tantra is very much about skills. It's not so much about going for some kind of deification or being one with God. It's kind of like, can you deal with the chaos of samsara and actually see the nirvana in samsara? So it's more like an ongoing struggling with whatever the world throws at you. So there's
really a way in which that aspect of like nirvana, samsara, I think, is very much present in Christianity in a way that maybe people don't see it right away, because it really is this idea of transforming death into glory, or of reaching glory through death. Like the cross seems to really be that. It's like this going down into the bowels of death, and then finding the surprise of going into the Holy of Holies at the same time. Right. So the idea is that Christ on the cross is going down into the chaos of death, but is at the same time going into the Holy of Holies. And so there's a union of that. I've been doing a lot of analysis of that in terms of the idea of death and glory and how they're related in Christianity. When Adam and Eve fall in the garden, God gives them garments of skin. And so it's like this wrapping of death. So you can imagine that as samsara that's kind of added as this kind of this weird dynamics of illusion and protection against the outside. All of this is added to Adam and Eve. But there's a way in which the word that's used to talk about the garments of death, and in tradition, there's the idea of the garments of glory, that it's the same. It's the same word, and it's the same. It comes at the same moment. The rabbis, when they talked about how Adam and Eve were covered in garments of glory, we're saying they're covered in garments of skin. And then when you start to look, you see that it appears many places in scripture where there's a relationship between like that, ultimately in the idea of non-dual reality, that the top and the bottom are ultimately the same. It's a dangerous way of thinking, because some people might take it in the wrong way, where they think that, okay, then it means that I can just do all this stuff and then I'm basically becoming a saint. It's like, well, that's not really what it means. It's more of this kind of emptying into the world that can then be transformed into something else.
Yeah, that sounds very very familiar. And indeed, you're right. So the problem with this samsara is nirvana, that you can then it could be like this excuse to just behave in any way you want, right? So that's why you always need to ground these types of practices in a sutric layer, right?
Tantra is not hedonism particularly.
I use Tantra and Sutra kind of maybe you have to realize that I use this as a general way to understand religions. So I kind of, when I look at a religion, let's say Christianity, I was like, oh, this is a tantric idea, or this is a sutric idea, because in practice, a religion that works, a religion that people want to take part in, will have sutric and tantric aspects, and it will have pagan aspects, because it's unavoidable. So, and a good religion will have some paganism, but it's kind of kept in check by good sutric and tantric aspects. So, and one thing that I also so Christ dying and then resurrecting, which is obviously also related to, as Cadell Last says, what is it again? Die again, die better, something like that. So you constantly have these kind of deaths of relationships, of thinking patterns, of ways of behavior, things that were part of you for a long time, and suddenly you have to give them up. You lose your health, or you lose a marriage, or you lose somebody you love, somebody dies. So these are bardo experiences. So that's a very big part of Buddhism as well. So the bardo is, of course, this is what you go through when you die and when you resurrect. So that's the sutric interpretation. But the more psychological interpretation of Chogyam Trungpa is that you constantly are dying and resurrecting all of the time. There's always parts of you that dies, situations that die, things that end, and then you find yourself nowhere, but you're still in some kind of place, and that's the bardo. It's like the split, it's the crack, it's this moment of it's kind of like you take a deep breath and you haven't taken your next breath yet, so you're somewhere but you're nowhere. And these are called bardo experiences, and you can explore that in meditations and in sexuality and so on. So that's a very big aspect of Buddhism as well.
Okay, we've come up to our 1.5 hour point. And
can I just throw this one last thing though? Belonging to a religion where actually enlightenment is death, so you don't have to worry about enlightenment because you get enlightenment when you die. Are you guys into reincarnations and afterlives? Because I'm not.
If we're into reincarnations and
afterlives, because I'm not.
Well, we'd have to talk about what that meant. There's a long conversation. Like, we're always reincarnating and we're always dying and being, in every moment.
Yeah, we are, but the self certainly dies at a certain death.
Well, there's a more vulgar version of that, and then there's a more more refined version. The refined version is that life just
Andrew, you're escaping the question.
No, I think
you don't know what I mean. Do you die when you die? Do you die when you die?
That's part of you die. Your personality definitely dies, and your body definitely dies. But there's a lot that is returned and that continues.
Well, I mean, you can ask yourself. Alexander, the question is Shakespeare dead according to you?
There you go.
Yeah. Yes, he's dead. The memory of Shakespeare is alive, but not Shakespeare. Big difference.
Good. So then
we say memory eternal at a funeral.
It's an interpretation, right? So both.
I think you're escaping a very fundamental question. A lot of guys tonight are very seriously interested in. That's what I'm saying.
I'm not escaping anything, but anyway.
Okay.
I would like to point out that first of all, Whitehead actually in Whitehead's philosophy there is objective immortality. But he actually also speculated about subjective immortality, but he said it was too complicated and he couldn't fit it in process and reality. Gustav Fechner is the guy that you need to read if you want to look at things that in what way can subjective immortality be meaningful and discussed. And the foreword is by William James. He was a very big fan of Gustav Fechner. There's a book called The Little Book of Life and Death. And it's fantastic. And if you read that book, then you might see that these types of discussions cannot be ended simply by saying, "Oh, when we're dead, then it's just over and done with." Well, yeah. Well,
I think they can, Thomas. I think they can.
Okay, that's great. That's fine. We can end on a disagreement. It's perfect. It's beautiful. Let's open it up to questions from the audience. Yes. And I want to just thank everybody for wonderful participation. It's been awesome. So I think Owen's appeared on the screen. So Owen, do you have a question?
Well, I'm going to actually just go to the guys because we've had some good questions coming up in the chat. Just before we do this, so a couple of points. I'm going to ask you to read your question. This is being recorded and it's going live on YouTube. So if you don't want to be on YouTube or on Parallax or whatever, just say, and then I can read out the question for you. Other thing is just try and keep your question nice and concise and clear so the guys know what you're talking about and that we can get as many asked as possible. I'm not going to go completely in order, but we'll go through them. So Paul, you had something. Do you want to unmute yourself and go first?
Yeah, sure. I mean, it might have been addressed or it has been addressed, but I think there's more there as well. I think this idea of hierarchies of being has been a really central idea that we've spoken about here. And the flatness of secular culture is a large part of what we're addressing here. So if you're going to organize a hierarchy, then you need a central point to aim at for that. And, that's my question is really, what is it that is the organizing principle for you guys? That was the question.
I think the internet answers that question with the algorithm. So the algorithms are going to dictate and give us hierarchy. And we need to respond to that. So if you don't think the algorithm is the right way to respond to the proper hierarchy, you need to invent something else. Yeah. That's my answer to that question.
I mean, I think that for sure, the question of hierarchy is one that I think that in Christianity, it tries to solve the problem of hierarchy, because the hierarchy is difficult, because it tends to create exclusion. It tends to create devaluing of things that are lower on the hierarchy. And so what Christianity does is that it places self-sacrifice at the top of the hierarchy. And so the hierarchy actually functions normally until you reach the top, and then you actually have to give. So what it does is it in theory creates something like a hierarchy of submission and compassion. And so the idea is that the leaders are supposed to love the people, love their body, and then the body submits to the top of the hierarchy. And so to me, that really is the best way to do hierarchy. Or else the problem with hierarchy shows itself pretty fast, where, obviously if you think of an ancient hierarchy, like even in terms of a Middle Eastern hierarchy, right? The king had all rights and all power on all people, and, could do whatever they want. You could see that even in Roman times, where, the Roman lord could rape his slaves, could do whatever he wanted. Like there was no, they basically were all owned by the top of the hierarchy. And so that's one of the dangers of hierarchy. And so I do think that, for me, at least I try. I don't think I succeed because it's hard, but the cross has to be at the top of the hierarchy in a general way. Let's say if you don't.
Then if you look at apocalyptic time, yeah. If you look at apocalyptic times, hierarchy is distorted because the young no longer listen to the old. So wisdom is thrown out the door. And why we have that sort of apocalypse right now is because of technology. So if the younger generation can adopt the technology and the dramatic technological changes faster than the older generation can, suddenly the younger generation think they're wise. That's precisely, I think, the problem today with 20-year-olds on Instagram, etc. So that's typical for apocalyptic times, is that the young kill the old, thinking we don't need the old any longer because we are the new and we are the new age. And that's exactly what's happening today. And that's why we talk so much about wisdom in our work.
And Alexander, you might like this, but there's something that a lot of people, maybe people don't know so much about anymore, but that the Enoch tradition, the tradition of the book of Enoch, which has been a little forgotten, is being kind of revived today, thank God. You have that exact pattern, which is people in that book, you really get a sense in which there's a relationship between paganism. So you have all these gods that aren't united to the one. You have a sense in which those pagan gods teach humans to make technology and magic and all of this stuff. And that all of this leads to hybridity and mixture and chaos and brings people down into ultimately what turns out to be the flood. So there's actually a map for what we're going through right now, which was written 2,000 something years ago. That's interesting to think about today.
Yeah, I think there's arbitrary hierarchies, and then there's hierarchies based on wisdom. So those are the two kinds of hierarchies. Anything to say about that, Thomas? I always have to prod you to speak.
Well, I mean, the thing is, hierarchy is something that animals do, right? Animals have hierarchies, and they can do that because when they fight, they don't kill each other. So once it's clear that one animal is stronger than the other, one of the animals kind of gives in and says like, okay, you're the alpha, and I'm just going to go down in the hierarchy, right? This is what animals do. This is not how humans work. So to a great extent, this discussion and this emphasis on hierarchy is a misunderstanding of human anthropology. Humans copy. Humans are in networks of desire, and that creates an enormous amount of competition and violence. And that's basically, so if you want to, of course, you want to create some kind of hierarchy in the sense that you want to create certain organizations that get things done. But what you really need to solve, and again, we come back to that, religion needs to solve the problem of desire running, going berserk and ending up in scapegoating. And hierarchies are typically just epiphenomena that happen on top of a much more basic thing, and that is basically this mimetic desire that is really steering us, and that is completely not acknowledged, especially in philosophy. Most of philosophy is worthless. It's completely worthless because it doesn't know how humans work. It doesn't know how like Heidegger. I mean, read Heidegger if you want to have a good laugh. My God. I mean, this is like the best example of somebody who's like, anyway.
Thomas, so let's say, for example, if you look at the social organization, it seems like there are embedded hierarchies in human civilization. I mean, that for example, you'll have, for example, groups, families, not necessarily the way we understand it, but you'll have groups and clans, and then those will embed themselves, and then there'll be some kind of hierarchy. Sometimes it doesn't necessarily have to go very high, but sometimes it can, and that's how you get.
I never said that there were no hierarchies. Of course, there are hierarchies. I mean, I have a job, right? I can assure you that there's a hierarchy. What I'm saying is that you can understand animals in terms of hierarchies. That's like a core thing for animals. That's like their structuring. That's their anthropology. Animal anthropology is the anthropology of hierarchy and battle. In a way, animals can battle for domination without killing each other. Humans cannot.
So, but the traditional
battle, they kill each other.
So, but the traditional religious hierarchy, like you see it in Hinduism, you see it in Christianity, you see it in most religions. I think you see it in Dante, for example, is that the highest point of the hierarchy would be the priestly. The priestly is the highest, and then lower than that, you would have the fighters would be lower on the hierarchy.
Objectors, yeah.
Yeah, and so the highest part of the hierarchy that's what I mean, like how the cross reveals the notion in which the highest point of the hierarchy is self-sacrifice. Because in theory, the priests have no temporal power. They have an authority without power. And so they actually end up inhabiting the highest part. And then you have lower than that, you have the temporal power, which takes its authority from the priestly caste, but then, and without it, it's in danger. If it tries to remove the priestly caste, then it loses its legitimacy and it has only power. So it actually creates a stabilizing structure, which is that the priest will give the moral code that, in theory, that the king is supposed to follow, and the people will listen to the king because they see in the priest someone who has an ideal that is not embedded in political power. So there are these. I think, for example, that medieval Christianity was very similar to Hinduism in the way that it's structured. The ones that pray, the ones that fight, the ones that work. Basically, it was that structure. So I think that type of hierarchy is different from the animal hierarchy, although there's similarities, but it's different.
It is universal, and it's precisely because body and mind are two different areas of expertise. So the mind is represented by the priest, and the king by the body is represented by the king. And in most orders, you try to figure out a way where the king and the priest can be equal, but one is superior in one realm and the other is superior in the other. The way you do, for example, the Mithric orders of the Roman Empire is that the priest is seventh highest and the sixth is the king, but the king has a prince who then inherits whatever king's position was, and often the second prince becomes the next priest. So the priest, for example, we have the tradition that priests do not give birth to children because if they did, they would be tyrants. So you always try to figure out, that's the separation of church and state in European culture, essentially. You keep the two realms separate. You keep the morbid separate from the Shah, etc. You keep the two separate precisely because if you keep them separate, you avoid having a tyrant. And that's what you do not want. Yeah. And because you have a dialectic relationship between the priest and the king, that can maintain an empire or an imperial order for long periods of time.
Yeah,
right. Let's go to another question because I think we can just stay on this, but it'd be good to get a few more voices. Kubalai, you had a question about the sacred. Do you want to jump in and say that?
Hi. Heidegger, who you so detest, he had an interesting notion about how in the modern world, people would sort of abandon the sacred and resort to thinking of religion as a psychological investigation of mythology. And it seems like that's what, Jordan Peterson's doing, and, it's what all the Jungians are doing. And, there's a sort of secularized gaze onto mythology as like the ultimate story, the greatest story ever told, and that there's like a secret coherence that's supposed to be divine from all of this. But it's all literary. It's all symbolic. We've kind of completely abandoned the idea of the sacred, and only the people who've been trained in practice or who've stumbled onto crazy psychedelics ever encounter it. And it's very hard to communicate to people who never gone into a cave or never dropped two tabs of acid. So how do you explain the sacred to a post-death of God world where everybody thinks that ontology is explained scientifically or scientistically?
That's why you don't get Petersonianism. We don't have Petersonian religion, and we never will, because psychological investigation is certainly not enough. No, this is just rediscovery, preparing for reformation, I would say. So the sacred and the private will return because it's fundamentally human. But contemporary society is pressuring us to make everything profane and make everything transparent, right? So as we're pressured by capitalism and technology to make everything profane and transparent, what returns is an enormous human deep desire for the private and the sacred. And by returning to privacy and sacredness, we can return to our human dignity. So that's going to dialectically happen. It's going to come out of this. Like, we already leave Facebook, right? We don't want to be there. I had a friend who died a few weeks ago. Nobody published anything on Facebook any longer. This was way too private now that a friend died. So they would all go into their own closed circuits and communicate one another again. Because you don't want to post a picture out there to everybody to see, because then it becomes profane. So the sacred is already returning, and we now technologically have to return to the technologies that makes it possible for us to be private and sacred.
Mm-hmm.
Maybe I would say, like, in terms of what Jordan Peterson is doing, one of the things that happened is that even beyond what Heidegger said, you could say that the world had fallen even lower than that, which is to see religious stories as just stupid, superstitious nonsense that doesn't mean anything. And so I think that understanding the psychological aspect of it is almost like a step going back up the ladder. So you can see how moving into the I can't say that word. And the psychological interpretation of religion was like a falling down into total madness. Now it's like a step up, and hopefully moving back into the true sacred, which obviously is not limited to the psychological. So I really always see Jordan Peterson as a bridge towards true religion, and understanding that, like Alexander said, like, we can't have Petersonianism. That would just be, and it just wouldn't hold either. It just wouldn't hold. It has to lead up to something more legitimate.
I don't think he would want that as well. So in defense of him,
yeah, I don't think he wants that either. He said specifically that he definitely does everything to avoid starting some kind of cult or religion or whatever.
Thomas disagrees here.
Thomas laughs.
Well, there's a bit, so yeah, that was an interesting question in the sense, because there's also this longing for the sacred, right? Now in Girard's system or way of thinking or philosophical anthropology, the sacred is this is not something you want, right? The sacred is the ritual where you kill people. That's the sacred. So, and another thing is that is important to understand about Girard's way of thinking is that the fact that religion is collapsing, and that people are that, let's say, these ecstatic rituals and these mass movements, that they are not here anymore, that's a feature, not a flaw. So that's basically what Christianity did. It dismantled all of these obvious ways to create religion, because most of these ways they're pagan ways. So this return to drugs and the ecstatic rituals, and I dropped 2 taps of acid. This is all paganism, and I'm not against that. But again, this is kind of a tantric way of thinking, right? If you play with these energies, you'd better know what you're doing, and you'd better have like a very, very clear idea of what sutra is. Otherwise, it will basically fry your head. And it will
now I'm going to be the Jonathan to Thomas here by saying that it's worse than you thought it is. So the sacred, yes, it's quite a horrible place to be, right? But it's better than being in the public and the profane. So because the public and the profane now, it's inside you everywhere, and it freaks you out, and you go mentally insane by being exposed all the time. It's like, we call it social pornography. You're in a constant pornographic state, like everything you do is exposed, and still nobody pays attention to you. So It's just like when you end up in that realm, you die to get back to this. You die to get back to the sacred in that case, because the sacred is better than that.
Well, this is only one dimension of the sacred. We're equivocating here, because the sacred means more than a Girardian version of the sacred. I would say.
But I think it's important to understand that, for sure, at least in terms of mysticism, there's a sense in which that notion of the sacred or the secret or the secret place, let's say, that is the source of reality, right? And if in a certain manner in the social sphere, that is the place of sacrifice, that in the mystical transformation of that understanding, it becomes something which happens inside you. And so there's a fractal relationship between, for example, the place in the temple where the epiphany of the God happens, after the sacrifice, but then that is happening inside you as well. So I think that, and it also becomes a place of self-sacrifice, like I said. And so the idea is that through the negation of the passions, through the negation of yourself, basically, you end up coming into this sacred space where that will be the equivalent of the epiphany in the temple, like of the glory of God descending on the Ark of the Covenant. Right? You read that in the early fathers all the time, where they say, things like, in your heart is the ladder to heaven, right? In your heart is the place where heaven and earth meet, basically. And so the sacred gets brought into the person. It still scales up, but it also gets brought into the person.
I think that in the conversations with Alexander and Andrew, we talked about the fake Dionysian and the true Dionysian.
Yeah.
So, which is basically, people going on Facebook and getting their kicks from the likes and stuff like that. I mean, this is trying to create a Dionysian ritual, but it's like a bleak parody of it. And then going out and scapegoating people, maybe burning down some buildings or something like that. That's kind of like, again, a disorganized, violent outburst of the Dionysian. But a tantric attitude would be to create these types of energies, these types of situations. These are situations of high undifferentiation, which is very dangerous. But if you have the right skillful means, then you can create these situations in a way that are compatible with what Christians would call love, or what a tantric what the tantrika would call the skillful means. But
or passion. I mean, passion is the most important.
And emptiness, right?
Mm-hmm.
So the sacred, the Dionysian is extremely powerful, and we need to create it. And everybody misses it, but it needs to be created in a way that is not pagan. You cannot go back to paganism. You cannot go back to consumerism, to these very vulgar versions of the Dionysian. We need to kind of lift it up to something that incorporates sutra and that incorporates the knowledge of archaic religion. And that's a challenge, because people need rituals. People need ecstatic Dionysian rituals, but there are very few people who can create them.
Well, they're happening all the time in rock concerts and that sort of thing, which is
this is you do not. This is not no. That's kind of like the cheap version of it.
No, I know. That's what I'm saying. It's the cheap version.
Okay, then we agree. Yeah.
And then 8 people got crushed at the Travis Scott concert. That was a nice Dionysian moment right there. They just trampled each other.
Yeah.
It's called the Cybelian moment in that case.
Yeah, Cybelian.
Mob. The mob is Cybelian, and the swarm is Dionysian, hopefully.
Yeah, but Dionysus leads you to the Cybelian mob, doesn't he? At least in the Bhakti, he does.
Right, Cybelian mob is world culture
as well.
That's world culture.
Albin, one of our MMA students, do you want to jump in?
Yes. My question was about religion, what it is, more or less. But could we see religion as a sort of project that, unifies everyone, but also that tries to unify our both objective and subjective understanding of our world, like both pathos, pathos, and also the logos understanding of the world. Because from what I can see, if we just go for one of them, it would become unstable or chaotic at the end.
I think religion has to include all 3 narratives of the narratology. So that has to be logos, the mythos, and the pathos, and all major religions strive towards all 3. So path essentially, is the real. It's reality. It comes back to haunt you all the time. Things didn't go the way you thought they would go. Your own body is a perfect example of the pathical narrative. I always use pornography and violence as examples of pathical narratives. The things you don't want your children to see are the pathical narratives. The logical narrative is essentially what we mostly call mathematics and science today, but it's basically going down to the facts as much as possible. And the mythical narrative is the story we tell about ourselves, which of course is more true than the logos. So religion aspires to all three. And we need all three. And what's great about them being three is that we don't ever end up with one of them. We all have to tell all three narratives constantly.
I mean, I don't necessarily totally agree with all the way it's described, but I think religion will necessarily involve pathos, and so you see it. That's part of the cross. Like the cross definitely has that in it, as much as it has the other aspects in it. And so, yeah.
Well, there shouldn't be, what I like about Whitehead is that, there's absolutely no contradiction between very deep thinking, very organized thinking. Alfred North Whitehead was a physicist and a mathematician, and he's mostly known for his work on the structure of mathematics. But he wrote this magnificent philosophical text with a metaphysical system, which included God. And I think that is I find that very appealing. That there is a continuum where religion and science are not in opposite. I think that those ideas are also very present in Catholicism, which doesn't see any contradiction between rational thought and religion.
Yeah, that was actually one of my questions. I was going to ask you about the integration of the modern world and science and everything else in religion, and how that can be done without wanting to go back to some kind of dogmatic orthodoxy.
I think that for sure cognitive science. Cog-science is definitely a really interesting bridge back into the mythological narratives. Like if you're interested, Jordan Peterson just put up a talk I gave for the Jung Society about how the pattern of Genesis 1 is basically the ontological pattern of experience and of attention itself. And so if you go back into that kind of first person experience and the idea that Cog-sci tries to reintegrate the observer into the equation, then I think that you have some interesting bridges where you don't have to declare things that are scientifically inaccurate in order to fully believe or fully participate in these ancient myths, because they are completely coherent phenomenologically. They're just not necessarily technical descriptions of what happened.
I would say we can go back here to the simplistic options and we can go back to the credible options. So I think we're going to see both. That's why I'm warning about the simplistic options. I mean, study the Book of Mormon, okay? And I don't mean the funny play on Broadway. I mean the real book, right? It's crap, right? I don't think the Quran is a very good literature either, to be honest about it. It's on a par with Mein Kampf and Mao's Little Red Book. There's a lot of shitty books out there, right? So, and the shitty books out there, they're simple and they give simple questions to complex answers. And they're going to be very popular at apocalyptic times. Count on it. The response to that are the credible options. The credible options have to both be compatible with science, have to be compatible with art, have to be compatible with humanity, have to be compatible with the mythical stories we always tell about ourselves again and again and again. You have to be compatible with both the logos and the mythos and the path that are going to be credible. Fiendishly hard work to do, but that's at least what I try to do, because I want to have a religion that I can actually believe in.
Is that going to be your final comment, Alexander? We have a couple minutes left, and maybe I want some final remarks from.
I'm perfectly happy with that. Leave the floor to Jonathan and Thomas.
That was pretty good. Yes. Okay, Jonathan.
I mean, I guess my final remark will be something like this, which is that as we notice religion kind of come back, and we see it happening chaotically and in a mad way, and we notice that the kind of iconoclasm that has been practiced, since the 1960s or even from before is also part of it. I think that we have to give up this idea that we have to be able to move over this idea that, anything but Christianity. It's like, I'll practice any religion except for the one that my grandparents practiced. And rather, it seems like in a really practical, honest way, seems like it would be far more fruitful to go back into something which was it's not even lost. It's still there. It's all still there. The whole structure is there. All the churches are there. Everything is there. And rather reinvigorate it with something which is no longer this kind of crap materialist religion that it became, but go back into the very deep mystical version that was there at the outset and is still accessible to us today. Seems like that would be the most efficient and also just the most realistic. And wanting to do something else seems to me just a continuation of this weird desire to just always go against what is there, like this weird desire to move into this weird indifferentiated space. And so that's my last pitch to you, which is going to be the most like a pitch that I've probably ever done in my life. So there you go.
That was almost a sermon.
Almost a sermon, yeah. With an altar call there. We needed a little music in the background.
Okay, Thomas.
Okay. Maybe I'll end with apocalyptic times. So it's not only about death and destruction, but apocalyptic times also means that these are times of revelation. Things become apparent. Things that are falling apart, things that need to be renewed. And I would like to stress that I don't think of religions as fixed things. Like Christianity is like this, Islam is like this. They are constantly changing. I just read a book by Tom Holland about the evolution of Islam and Judaism and Christianity in late antiquity, and it's absolutely fascinating to see how these religions are constantly changing. So apocalyptic times, they bring a lot of opportunities because there's a lot of revelation. And right now we have an unprecedented exchange of technology and psychology, we call it psychotechnology. A lot of people are talking to each other across boundaries, scientists, psychologists, religious people. So there's an enormous exchange of knowledge. And that is, I think, very fascinating. And that gives me a lot of hope. So I would like to end with a note of optimism.
Great. Awesome, great. That was just awesome, guys. That was just fantastic. I loved every moment of it. What we're going to do now is we're going to, for the people who are still around and want to move into our little salon, I think there's a link in the chat, so you can go there and hang out and talk to people about what is in process. What we've done here and what we've been chatting about. And I guess I could just say thank you so much for taking the time and for doing this. And I hope we can do it again sometime.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Thanks a lot. Thanks a lot for this expansion of the MMA room, which has been amazing in these past months. We've had good discussions. We've had guests in, but this is the first time that we opened up the space and have this amazing dynamic with these with you four men on the screen. As Andrew said, there is a link to Wander, which is a place where the conversation can, take all of the branch out in all the ways that it needs to. Room for much more participation for everyone. And at the same time, I just want to say that MMA is just going to continue on being great in these coming months. We have even John Vervaeke coming in here, joining us in the middle of December. So we're just continuing on the path. So thanks a lot, everyone, all speakers, Jonathan and Alexander, Thomas, and thanks all participants. It was really great seeing this many new men here today. Make sure you copy the link from the chat before we close the room.
Thanks, everybody.
Okay.
Thank you. Bye.